Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, including from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Everything decided to snow and ice, and that was fun. I always enjoy when my commute for 30 miles turns into like bumper cars. It really is the most magical time of year.
Oh yeah, I don't leave the house, so it doesn't really impact me.
As a shut-in, your observations on weather are purely just nice anecdotes. Yeah.
Ah, yes, snow, sleet. I'm familiar with these concepts from books.
Never having experienced weather myself, I don't believe in such things. I only believe in time of possession and red zone percentage. And obscure stats about Christian Ponder.
Yeah, we got to get this one out of the way. Remember, 2011, his rookie year, when he took over for Donovan McNabb, led the league in red zone passer rating.
Well, now everyone knows something. And at the time, Arif said, that's great, but that doesn't really mean anything, because these things tend to regress pretty quickly. And everyone jumped on him. So if anything, we're just taking this opportunity to remind everyone that Arif was right once in 2011.
I was right about the specific thing. I was not right about the balance of things, because I was like, oh, Christian Ponder's pretty good, huh? That was a mistake.
Well, see, your mistake here was reminding people that you thought the Christian Ponder was going to be good.
Yeah, that was whoops.
Yeah, our bad. Welcome to this show. We have a game to talk about of sorts. It happened against the Seahawks. The Vikings did not win, and John DeFilippo is no longer employed by the Minnesota Vikings. Also something we will delve deep into. But before we do, just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys so much for listening. And if you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. If you hear value in what we're doing, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode. That's more of a subscription based, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and help donate to the show there. Just help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Speaking of which, we have two donations to speak of this week. From Patreon, Jeff McNamee says, he doesn't say anything. He's just helping keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay through there. So again, thank you, Jeff. We really do appreciate that. And we also have another fan from Australia. I love our Australian contingent because they want to talk about rugby. I don't know much about rugby, but we do have a thing about rugby at the end. So this is a hardcore Vikings fan from down under here. Sadly, I'm not a punter. Well, that
puts you in the minority from what I understand of Australians.
Exactly. And Australian rugby enthusiasts. Love your show, and despite the weakness of the Aussie dollar at the moment, want to pay my way. A few questions I have for you. Number one, after 40 years of Prince fandom and 30 years of pain following the Vikings, I'm finally getting a chance to visit Minneapolis the week after the Super Bowl. What is the best vantage point to watch the ticker tape parade to celebrate our Super Bowl win in Atlanta?
Interesting. I guess old heads would say Fauché Tower, but that's actually not very high up. The IDS, but the IDS building's going to be crowded. I mean, the parade's going to go through like Nicollet Mall. There's no good vantage point. So I sit on top of like Crave Bar or something, which I don't like to recommend people go to Crave Bar all that much, but that's where Tom Johnson got arrested.
Oh, yeah,
that's like a sort of a Minneapolis icon, right? Historical landmark, a plaque, you know?
Since they tore up 35W in such a way, it was like, they probably would have been like cheering on the team on the way, I'm remembering the whole like parade of like people hanging out on the 35W bridges, like cheering when the Twins like won, and like when things went through 35W there, I think when they had like come back from some game or made the playoffs. Can't remember specifics on that. You could just, I believe, just go to Britt's Pub instead and just drink yourself until like you start hallucinating and you start to think that the parade is actually happening in Minneapolis. I think that could be your best option.
I like the idea of someone traveling all the way from Australia to go to a British-themed pub in Minneapolis. That's good. We'll recommend Britt's Pub.
Well, the food's fine and the drinks are all right. So just it's a fine place to drink yourself into a delirious state. Number 2, given most Vikings games start Monday 4 a.m. here in Australia, what is the best alcohol and food combination to save my job through Monday?
Oh, wow. I'm not very familiar with Australian cuisine or alcohol. This is it's a super dusty question, honestly.
Well, you could go with a tried and true breakfast burrito thing, which does not take a lot of work, and it tends to be more.
Do they have burritos in Australia? I don't know.
It's entirely possible that you'll be able to get some form of a tortilla. It's not terribly difficult.
So usually you take some sort of flatbread, ideally a tortilla. I'm explaining to the Australian listener.
A tortilla or pita.
Right, yeah. Scramble some eggs. I know they have eggs in Australia. You can't trick me on that one. And then
they come from the chooks.
You throw in potatoes and some form of sausage or bacon or both. Some local sausage. I'm sure there's Australian sausage, maybe.
Really, as much ham as you want to toss in there.
Or whatever in it. Yeah. And you just wrap it all up. You could put some sour cream in there. I know they've got milk down there, so they must have sour cream. So
yeah, you would have to think, I would put some hot sauce in it because that's just me. I prefer eggs and hot sauce personally. You can do that, and whatever type of grain alcohol helps you survive. Being a Vikings fan in Australia. At 4 a.m.
As an Australian, I'm sure you know much more about alcohol than I do.
That's a terrible stereotype. I don't know if it's true necessarily, but I just
it's
like
just terrible.
I just like taking any opportunity to call you out on a stereotype.
Statistically, Americans drink a lot less than other mostly white Western countries.
You like that silence? That's the silence of me not Googling this conversation.
All right. Fantastic. I hate being fact-checked. Let's move on.
Exactly. P.S. We do not want to sign Valentine Holmes. He'll be worse than Jared Hayne. That's your rugby speak for today. Love your work,
I
Cobbers.
Googled him. He's apparently going to enter the NFL. He's a rugby star.
Yeah, and apparently Jared Hayne is fighting aggravated sexual assault allegations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there's that.
I did not Google Jared Hayne. I would have known that.
Love your work, Cobbers. Andrew from Australia. Thank you, Andrew. Again, if you enjoy the show and would like to help donate to the show, paypal.me/NorseCode or patreon.com/NorseCode. Again, if you enjoy the show, if you hear value in what we do, we appreciate anything that you are willing to toss our way. We're just trying to keep the lights on. Also, let's open this up a little bit. After the Vikings loss, I poked the bear that is Vikings Twitter. And
you did?
And I poked the bear. You got into all the Twitter fights. I just wanted reactions from fans as to how it felt to be a Vikings fan necessarily after watching the Vikings lose another bad game. The offense was not playing well. The defense was fantastic, but the offense was not playing well. So the question then becomes, what does it feel like to be a Vikings fan? Or what was your takeaway from the game? Here are some of our favorites. Why does it feel like the Vikings paid $84 million for the QB version of AP, except without the whole being the best at their position thing?
Rough.
Daily Norseman asks, why, dear God, why? Bombo, when do I get to die? Why do I cheer for this team? Oh, Charles Brolin, play calling, bad or awful?
Oof.
Don from Ohio, are you happy now, James?
Well, I mean, you got to answer that.
Well, I'm never happy.
Fair.
Also, what do you recommend as a nice mixer for bleach? Kyle Seagal and I are tired of drinking it straight. I think Bloody Mary mix would probably be a good way of masking some of that scent.
Oh, I was going to go in the complete opposite direction. I was going to suggest ammonia so that you can make chlorine.
Oh, well, depending on how much science you want to do, you can either go with ammonia or you can go with a Bloody Mary mix. Either way, you can't really go wrong. The Christmas Stuss asks, as a 12, what is Arif's opinion of this game?
God, no.
Josh Randall, how do you fix this so that we're not completely embarrassed if we make the playoffs? I like the word if in there.
Well, I mean, the Vikings have a greater than 50% chance of making the playoffs. That is a fact.
It is.
Well, I mean, it's a probability, so it's not like a fact. But like,
I was literally about to correct you on that.
Right, yeah. But like, a number of projection websites put the Vikings above 50%. So it's kind of close to a fact, I guess.
Kind of.
Yeah, Upshot, 538, Football Outsiders, all above 50%. So, yeah.
Kenneth Allen, why is our fan base so stupid? I can't believe people are clamoring for Keenum. Obviously, Cousins isn't playing well, but Keenum is playing even worse.
True, but he has won his last 3 games, so he's good now.
Oh, he's good now. Also, does this game change your opinions from last week's piece on DeFilippo at all?
So I don't know if this question was submitted, like, most of these questions were submitted before, like, he got fired. So the answer is no. But I'm going to have to live with that, right? Because, like, well, he did. So now the take is just the Vikings made, like, the wrong decision, which is going to look great when Stefanski just designs, like, a 400-point-a-game offense.
I feel like if he starts doing that, then people are going to forget about all takes before. Like, they'll just be distracted by this until the offseason when, like, oh, yeah, I remember when Arif stood up for the notorious JDF. Yeah,
if I remember anything from Carson Wentz's MVP run, it's that people had no issues taking time out of their enjoyment mid-game to tell me what they thought. So that's a nice thought, James, that you think people will be distracted by how good a team is.
I suppose you're right. John asks, how does Arif keep faith in humanity while engaging in Twitter fights?
I don't.
Did you have a good one last night?
I had a number of them. Yeah, so... The Seattle penalty, non-penalty on the field goal block. So it's a new rule in my defense, but I had said because the ref picked up the flag and I was like, oh, so there's no flag on the play. That means it's legal. Also, now that we know it's a legal play, and I thought it was legal because he didn't put his hands on a Vikings player. So it turns out that the new rule passed this year. You cannot use your opponents for leverage. And the problem is if you look up leverage online, it's like standing or jumping on your own teammates. And that is like weird because if you put your hands on a teammate, that's not standing or jumping on them. But the official, and that's like the old rule, right, is the problem. Anyway, I was wrong. And so that's my mistake. And a bunch of people corrected me, and that's like fine. Like, okay, I'm wrong. But a bunch of people are like really mad at me for it. And not just like mad in general because the ref got the call wrong, but like mad at me. And so I was just like, relax. I got it wrong. My bad. And they're like, yeah, but I mean, you have to admit that you were wrong. And it's like, but I did?
Why can't we spike the ball in your general direction? Like,
right. So that was one fight. Another fight obviously was about the DeFilippo thing. Another fight was just like about how I fight on Twitter, which is like, I mean, that's just who I am, guys. At this point, like, if you can't handle me fighting with people after a game, good. Hard,
I swore to God, if you were gonna do the whole, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. Like, if you were actually gonna, I'm not. Like, if you were gonna break that out, this
not a lifestyle blog.
This podcast was gonna end.
No, it's just like it's just who I am, right? Like after every game, I get in some weird, inane Twitter fight that I'm not taking that seriously, but like. And some people are. So
I'm gonna Photoshop that picture from it wasn't Blake Murphy, it was somebody else it was a former guest of ours that put you in with hair had photoshopped you this week. I'm just gonna like caption it with the whole, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best.
But yeah, so there's like a whole fight about me fighting, which was fun. Yeah, man. Like, so there's like some people were like, "You're trolling," and I'm like, "Well, none of it's." I'm cavalier, right? But I'm not like trolling. I'm not like saying intentionally inflammatory things. These things are like my thoughts, right? Like, I do think that DeFilippo is not solely to blame for this game, nor should you fire him because of this game. and so on. Like, these are the things that I think. Like, I think Cousins played poorly, and I think there was a lot of pressure, and so on. So, like, it's not trolling. I'm just, like, being kind of lighthearted about it, and I understand that people take Vikings football really seriously, and I get that. I'm not saying you shouldn't take it seriously, but the fact that I'm not, taking these fights very seriously does not mean I'm, like, trolling. So I just found it really weird.
This is just part of your whole, like, you shouldn't interact with people thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's proven to be a good rule.
Yeah.
Also, don't log on.
Yeah. You should stay off of Vikings Twitter. It is a silly place. Paul asks, is it too late to tank for a good quarterback in the draft?
Yes.
Yes. David.
Well, actually, contrarily, it's too early.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Because the guaranteed money left on the contract.
Yeah. Which is 3 years of all guaranteed. David asks, how is it possible that Bob Schnelker is no longer the worst Vikings offensive coordinator that I can remember?
Schnelker was definitely worse. Like, I mean, all these questions are asked immediately after a game where they scored 0 points before garbage time. So, like, fair. But I mean, like the Vikings are definitely not like dead last in points or anything like that. They're way below where they should be, something like 23rd, 24th in points per drive. So, like, bad, especially considering the amount of talent that they have. So I'm not going to say that, like, their offensive coordinating this year has been, like, stellar secretly. But, man, Schnelker was, like, definitely way worse.
Shout out to Adrian, who said that he won't be on the staff by the time they record the episode, referring to JDF. So that was your prediction.
Call.
Good call. Kyle Slaby, per my wife's request, compare this game to a food experience you've had. Is it an expensive steak that came out burnt? Is it a questionable gas station hot dog that gave you heartburn, etc.?
Well, it can't be the steak because I would go in expecting something great. And I predicted that the Vikings would lose by like 5 or more points. So it's not that, but obviously it was much worse than I expected. It'd be like going to a restaurant where I wasn't like a big fan of just the restaurant in general or the cuisine or whatever, but I'm like told that like, oh, they got a new chef or whatever. So not to name names, there's a restaurant nearby that specializes in a particular diet of food that I'm not huge into, but I'll have, right? It can be good. And the restaurant itself is just like not that good. But, I'm told they rework the menu, so I go back and it's worse. And it's like that. It's like, okay, it's hard to screw up like, your chicken salad or whatever, right? Like actually it's not that hard to screw that up, but it's usually a high floor kind of food because the ingredients are not too difficult to cobble together. But it tasted like the chicken was like dry. So like, it's like that. It's like you go to a restaurant where you're told like things will probably be better. They've worked on some things. They've looked at the tape. But you didn't really think it was going to be better. And then it was like worse than before. Like you're just like, oh, how did you? You identified that you had a problem and you made it worse. Yeah,
I think that this actually reminds me of the whole like bad Indian to bad pizza thing from New York, where I walked into the Indian place, not really knowing a ton about, but just like, okay, well, this is fairly well reviewed, whatever. So I go in and it's the worst Indian food I've ever had, and I was like, oh God, why am I like eating any of this? So then I leave and I was like, okay, I have to have something else, and then it manages to be even worse. Like, oh God, the pizza is even like the pizza even manages to just be like the worst thing. It was like, oh wow, not only is this the worst Indian food you're ever gonna have in your life, it's also the worst pizza you're ever gonna have in your life. Like, oh, wonderful. I'm gonna go hang out with Arif now and complain. As one does. Drunken Vike, what's worse, the Vikings offense or having to buy a holiday gift for a relative's significant other who you barely know and has no discernible hobbies?
Definitely the Vikings offense. You never really committed to that gift anyway, man.
That's the reason why gift cards exist.
Yeah, you've got options.
Like, what is their local grocer? There.
Yeah, here's a Kroger gift card. Love you.
Exactly. You're probably going to use this in some way, shape, or form. It's not like a Circuit City thing or whatever. I don't even know if Circuit Cities are a thing anymore. There's my age. Sorry,
I
Eric.
remember when I used to get so hyped for Best Buy gift cards, and Best Buy's like not out of business or anything like that, but like I never go to Best Buy now.
No, you should avoid it if at all possible. It is, again, a silly place. Worst off-season move, not addressing the offensive line or hiring JDF?
So they kind of actually did address the offensive line. They just did it in a bizarre way, right? Because they got an offensive tackle, and by doing so, they moved their offensive tackle to guard. So that's like mistake one. And that, I think, is a talent evaluation error on the part of trying to figure out, if Mike Remmers can be a guard. They also signed Tom Compton, who's been playing a lot better than I think a lot of people expected. Nick Easton, they didn't expect to be injured. They traded for Brett Jones before the season after Elfline's recovery took too long. They definitely addressed the offensive line, maybe not in the manner that I would have liked, and certainly not from a talent evaluation perspective, a way that works going forward. But they added a bunch of new bodies, and some of the new bodies they added you could reasonably expect to be contributors. So they did address it. So the worst move then, therefore, has to be hiring the guy they fired.
Yeah, probably. Raul asks, if we start false starting on 3rd and 1, how long before opposing teams start declining the penalty?
Dang. Yeah, so here's the weird thing. The Vikings are actually really good on 3rd and long. They're like 8th or 9th in converting 3rd and long in the NFL. Like, okay. That's interesting. So I don't know that means they're actually better at converting 3rd and long than they're at 3rd and short. It's not like being 8th in 3rd and long is probably still worse than being 30th on 3rd and short. So, I mean, the percentages are just so dramatically different. So probably don't do that. But I would say, I mean, the game against Seattle, I think it's just a huge anomaly, right, that they couldn't convert on 3rd and short. And I don't think it's all play calling or all Cousins or all the offensive, well, a little bit of the offensive line.
Well, how can you call it necessarily an anomaly when we've seen it, repeatedly over the past several games that, like, as soon as he turns into like 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, the immediate play seems to be trying to run up the gut, and it fails in dramatic fashion. And they are now forced at a 4th and inches, or again, 4th and 2, 4th and 1. Like, it seems like it's happened quite a bit, especially over the last few games.
No, for sure. But think about it this way. The 30th in the NFL or whatever they are in converting 3rd and short means you convert 3rd and short 47% of the time. Like, you convert basically half the time on 3rd and short. They did not convert once. It's still an anomaly. Like, the fact that the worst performing team on 3rd and short performed poorly on 3rd and short, like, yeah, it doesn't seem like an anomaly. Even if you just take a look at the last couple of games, which, by the way, includes the Green Bay game, they still performed far worse than they typically would, even after you account for Seattle's defensive strength, even after you account for the Vikings' typical failures there. They have converted runs up the gut. I mean, Latavius Murray entering the game had a 50% conversion rate on 3rd and 4th and short. And Kirk Cousins has not like a high, but like an above 50% conversion rate on 3rd and 4th and short. Which I know that sounds weird that like Murray and Cousins both are above 50%, but the Vikings are below 50%, but it's like all the other shit that doesn't work, right? So, it is an anomaly. It just is an anomaly in the direction that you would expect, right? Like, if they converted all of their 3rd and shorts, like, A, they might have even won the game. That's kind of a weird thing to think, because they would have kept on extending those drives. But like B, that I think is much easier to identify anomaly, because that's weird as hell. But yeah, they've run up the gut and it's worked. I don't like when you run up the gut to close the box. I just think that's a bad idea. I think they should consistently kind of spread formations. But they also did that. They spread the formation and then they passed on 3rd and short, and that didn't work either. And it's like they took that idea or suggestion and turned it to an extreme. I think you should still like have a running threat when you're on 3rd and short, but you need to spread the field out so that if you decide that you want to run the ball, that you have the ability to do that. and Cook was lined up he wasn't lined up in the slot or anything like that, but he was lined up like on the outside shoulder of the tackle. Clearly it's not a running threat. And so I think you need to have a running threat. I think you need to spread the ball out. I think that's the best way to handle 3rd and short. But they did a couple of things on 3rd and short, and none of it worked. And historically, some of it's worked. So it is an anomaly. It just I can understand why it doesn't feel like one.
Let's talk about something kind of bizarre. Luke Braun asks, what is with the Vikings and losing to alternate jerseys?
Yeah, apparently that's a thing. Someone was like, "Oh, this is the perfect question to ask Arif," and I've done no additional research on this. So
you're showing up to game day.
Not. Yeah, right. Yeah, they lost Thursday night to the Rams, right? So that they were wearing alternate jerseys, I assume. Who else wore alternate jerseys? The Bills didn't. The Jets might have. Were they wearing their color rush?
Nope. Nope. Jets were wearing their normal jerseys.
Huh. So what were the alternate jerseys?
Well, it was definitely the Rams. Right. This season it was also the Seahawks. I don't think the Patriots weren't. Patriots were wearing their normals.
Yeah.
I just don't think anybody else this season necessarily was.
So is this like a multi-season question?
This has to be a multi-season question because I do have memories of losing the last couple years in late night games to, dumb stuff.
Just
like the fact they showed up in a different jersey.
It's
we don't have tape.
Explain...
We don't have tape for them playing in this specific jersey. We can't review the tape on this. It's a different team. Absolutely ridiculous. This will be one of these.
We'll just take your word for it, Luke. That's a thing that they do because I don't have evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, this will be one of those off-season. March or February articles at The Athletic. Why do the Vikings have problems against teams in their alternate
Their eyes
jerseys?
just hurt, man. Someone did or they're still doing actually, Bill Belichick win tracker by hoodie type. So it's a thing.
I love the off season. Just articles like that are just proof of the off seasons, just the gifts the off season gives us time and time again. Let's wrap this up with 2 questions. First off, Dusty asks, how and why did John DeFilippo flim-flam the Zim-Zam?
It was very rude of him to do that.
It was very rude. And let's go with Matt, and let's start this conversation about the game with how much did blown calls affect the game?
Like a blown referee calls? I assume that's what that's about. I mean, if you strongly believe in momentum, I guess, right? Because I thought the pass interference on Xavier Rhodes was, or at least the second one, was fairly ticky-tacky, and I don't think it was the right call. I think that, obviously, in retrospect, the Bobby Wagner jumping the line was the incorrect call. And, good chance the Vikings make that field goal, kind of despite their history at making field goals. And so, the Vikings get on the board and, yeah, I guess, right? But I don't know that it had, especially because it's very easy for me to catalog, these are the blown calls that hurt the Vikings, but I haven't been keeping track of, the blown calls that hurt the Seahawks, and I'm sure Seahawks fans, of which I am not one, have been doing a better job keeping track of the of the way the referees might have screwed them. So I don't know. My thoughts on momentum, for example, are fairly complicated, but mostly because you've got 24 different players that respond to different emotional states in different ways, and so momentum usually is the product of a lot of those players kind of cohering emotionally and responding the exact same way to the same thing. And that doesn't always happen. It's always easier to identify after the fact than during. And if one player is in the zone, which might be a thing, right? Because I've been in competitive activities and I felt the concept of momentum. It's a thing that you can feel and you tend to perform better. But that doesn't mean the player next to them is. And so even if one player feels kind of invigorated, right, by the 3 points, then the player next to them might just might not. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's better to keep an even keel. Maybe it's better not to be too emotional. So like that's the issue. But yeah, I mean, you can say, hey, they lost 21-7 and the 7 points were in garbage time, which in fairness, the Seahawks last 7 points probably were too. Or last 8, I should say, because it was a 2-point conversion. But I don't think that they played an outsized role. I don't think that they were the reason the Vikings didn't cover. But it probably would have closed the gap. So that's a thing to think about.
Well, let's start in on the game itself. And if we're going to start with something positive, we can start with the defense, which was playing out of their minds for a considerable amount of this game. This was a game where Russell Wilson was incredibly limited. I believe you probably have the stat in front of you as to how many passing yards he had, but it was ridiculously low.
72.
Yeah, it was ridiculously low. And this is same thing happened against Drew Brees when he had like 120 something, and the Vikings still managed to lose. Like it's difficult to fathom that a defensive performance like this ends up going unrewarded. Especially with how often they seem to be getting pressure on Russell Wilson.
Yeah, they had like 13 pressures on Russell Wilson, 3 of which were his fault for holding onto the ball so very long as he tends to do.
And Anthony Barr even showed up to the party. Like, where the hell has he been the last month?
Right. Yeah, no, he had a good game. Maybe his best game of the year. Not that that's saying a ton. I mean, despite like my defense of Anthony Barr, it's not like he's been playing friggin' stellar or anything like that. But he had a great game. Well, it's interesting. So if we're going to talk about like the Vikings defense, so a lot of the Vikings defense, it felt like, especially early on, that they were not getting bailed out. Well, yeah, getting bailed out. Not necessarily because the calls were wrong, although I guess here's maybe an example of a Seahawks fan not liking the call. The face mask call being called as like the visor hole, like your hand is in the gap of the visor. Like, just call it a face mask, dude. Like, what are you doing? Now everyone is suspicious of the call.
A face mask hole. That's the new giving them the business.
Right, yeah. It felt like, maybe that they were bailed out or they were very bend, don't break. Like they happened to not break in the red zone. And maybe that felt, kind of fortuitous, especially early on. But as the game kind of progressed, they were doing better and better job. But they did struggle against the run game. Linval probably had his worst game of I was going to say season, but it might be the worst game he's had in a purple uniform. It was pretty bad for him. Everson Griffin was up and down. I know a lot of people would say that he just had a down game, and obviously his failures were obvious, right? Losing contain on Russell Wilson when he rushed inside, when he probably should rush outside, even though the tackle was giving him inside. He was actually a pretty good pass rusher. He was winning, even when the ball kind of got out quickly. He was able to get into the pocket, even if it's not, I guess, technically a pressure. Sheldon Richardson had a really good game. He had a bunch of pressure and a couple of stops. Daniil Hunter ended up having a sack, a hit, and 2 hurries. But he was up and down in the run game too. So he ends up with a missed tackle. He's got a couple of stops. He's got, and those are great. And he did show up in some key situations, but he also lost run contain at times. But the best players are probably Anthony Harris, Anthony Barr, so I guess the Anthonys too. PFF says Harrison Smith had a really good game. He was only targeted once, showed up a lot in containment in the run game, and on rewatch, it felt like that was the case. PFF also said Xavier Rhodes had a bad game, but they dinged him for both penalties when really he should have just been dinged for one, if that. And so I would say he probably had an average-ish game, but not great. Holton Hill was up and down, but mostly up, which was great. Tulio Johnson was mostly down, which kind of sucked. It was. Oh, and Ben Gideon was on the field a lot. He was 36 snaps, which I think is his season high. And a lot of that has to do with the way Seattle plays offense and puts players on the field. They're in jumbo a lot with George Fant, who doesn't typically catch passes, but there's the one, so there you go. He outpaced Kyle Rudolph, so that's great. He had 9 yards. Rudolph had 7. But by putting that extra lineman on the field, you essentially forced Ben Gedeon onto the field, and they exploited him a lot. What's really interesting is that though he was poor in pass coverage for sure, he was actually surprisingly really bad in run defense, and so that was a big problem too. So yeah, there's all of that. I think kind of gives you the shape of how the defense did. Stephen Weatherly, I think, had one of his better games. It didn't end up mattering all that much, but, I thought that was good of him. But, yeah, the Vikings did a really great job in coverage. A lot of times, Russell Wilson holding onto the ball had a lot to do with how good the coverage was because Russ goes through his reads really quickly. And so if he's holding onto the ball that long without attempting to move in the pocket that much because he's very often moving to shift the coverages and force the scramble threat, then, it's clear that the Vikings are doing a very good job in coverage. And so that ended up enabling a lot of the pressures that they got. And that's really good to see because Tyler Lockett's been having a really, really good year. And that, receiver core, I mean, we talked to Danny Kelly, the receiver core is fairly underrated, and they can do some pretty good things. One note, Holton Hill did get maybe a little bailed out on the deep shot end zone throw, but his position did kind of force Doug Moore into a little bit of a worse catching situation. 9 times out of 10, once the receiver has secured the ball in that situation for an NFL-level receiver, in that situation, they'll be able to, despite what Holton Hill was doing, they'll be able to get the touchdown. Maybe not 9 times out of 10, but it is a given in this scenario that the receiver catches the ball, and they don't always do that. But Holton Hill was in generally good coverage, or good position, not good coverage.
I was going to say, how did you feel Holton Hill did in the game?
Up and down. Like, I thought he had some good plays for sure. I thought that he got a little lucky on the David Moore one. But, he got a little unlucky on it was a dropped pick, I think. I think it was him. And so that kind of sucks. He did get burned a little bit in the running game, but that's because they did a lot of stuff on the outside targeting him. And when you don't have Trey Waynes, then it makes sense to go after Holton Hill in the running game. So that's worth considering, too, is that he may have done pretty well in pass coverage on most of his attempts. And certainly came up with good results in pass coverage. But, he did struggle in the running game, and he did get a little lucky here or there. Overall, I mean, in terms of, what it means, that's immensely positive. I think that's a really good sign going forward for him.
Well, as far as the rest of the defense goes, I mean, you were right on the whole, as the run aspect, I was almost perplexed as to how they were able to run the ball so effectively against the Vikings. And it's not that they just spent the whole time on the outside. They were able to get a whole bunch of inside runs on there as well.
Yeah, it wasn't just exploiting the defensive ends. One big problem, unfortunately, and this showed up a number of times over the past 2 years, Tom Johnson got washed out a ton in the run game. He just kind of got moved. Which is an issue, right, that he's had for a while. And it seemed like, from time to time he would shore it up. I think last year, for example, was even better than the year before against the run. But, he got washed out a lot and got out of his gaps a lot. As a result, they ended up being able to kind of run through him. Jaleel Johnson didn't do a great job. I already mentioned Linval Joseph had a tough game, especially in short yardage. Apparently he was a good pass rusher, so I did miss that. So I think PFF ended up giving him a net positive grade. But as a run defender, for sure, he was partially responsible for a lot of big problems. Ben Gedeon, though, at the second, when your defensive linemen are having a big problem, then you kind of want your linebackers at the second level to do more. And if they're running the ball a lot, and remember on opening drives, or the opening 2 drives of the game, the Seahawks are the most run-heavy team in the league at 60%. You should expect your run-stopping linebacker to stop the run, and he did a very, very poor job of that.
Well, let's talk about the offense.
Do we have to?
I mean, we could just launch into the fact that the performance of the offense was so bad that it caused, the firing of John DeFilippo. But by
the way, Seahawks Twitter, of which I'm not a part, is celebrating that they've apparently gotten a number of people fired this season. I guess...
is it like a bad coach's black hole or something?
Well, it was like the offense plays against Seattle, and then the week after, the offensive coordinator, whatever, gets fired. Like, I guess that happened. Did they play the Browns? Maybe that happened to them. That happened to the Cardinals, that's for sure. They played the Seahawks, and Mike McCoy got fired. So that's a thing. Oh, yeah, they played the Panthers, and the Panthers got rid of a bunch of offensive staff. Not Norv, though.
Well, no, they'll never get rid of Norv. They're lousy with Norv at this point. No,
infested with Norv.
Yeah, if I'm gonna be honest, that is actually a pretty cool legacy for a team to have for a year. It's like, yeah, well, coaches play here and they just die.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. They had this is like a very Seahawks Twitter thing. Back in the Legion of Boom days, they were like bragging about how teams that would play the Seahawks would get so beat up that they would like lose the next game. And I guess there was some statistical significance to that, but like not a ton. It's all small samples. But they get very into that.
Well, again, if you're looking for something to hold, they're just looking for a reason to be happy in Seattle. That's all. That's just.
They got the 5th seed all wrapped up.
Yeah, well, I'm just impressed their offensive line was worth half a damn. But let's talk about the Vikings offense. And the first thing that we should talk about is not the horrible play calling, is not the performance of Diggs and Thielen, despite being double and triple covered nearly the entire game. What on earth was with that backwards pass?
My God, I nearly died just right there. It was like the most Joe Webb, Josh Freeman move. Like, or I guess you could add Teddy to that, right? Because he did the left-handed throw.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like Joe Webb's like throw while he was in the middle of getting sacked, Teddy's throw with his left hand in the middle of getting sacked, Josh Freeman's any throw.
It was weird because this throw was before the throw that Russell Wilson just tossed up in the air that was intercepted. That if the defender would have been upright, would have been able to run that back for a touchdown.
Which I don't want to like blame Kendricks too much for that, by the way.
No,
it's just like
God, no.
It would have been nice, but like when he got the interception, right? Like that's not bad.
Yeah, and then the Vikings just kneeled it to end the quarter. It's like, really?
Yeah.
You're ending the half like that?
It would have been nice to see a shot. There were like 16 seconds left, so that one doesn't bother me as much. Yeah. But like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to see a shot.
But that pass by Cousins to Murray.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Like, you will not see that again, likely, in your entire life.
It was just so befuddled. And, like, what's really interesting is that, like, with some quarterbacks, like Teddy or Webb, you know, a baffling pass like that might be the product of them being so kind of improvisational that if something is, like, not quite right in their assessment of the situation, they'll do that accidentally. And usually, you know, with Teddy, for example, that ended up being kind of a positive. I mean, we saw, you know, an incredible pass to Diggs against Denver. We saw like a really incredible pass to Matt Asiata. And it's like the same kind of gene, right? For Cousins, it felt like it was the opposite, where he was like, the play here demands that I throw to Latavius Murray. And it was like, bro, what are you doing? Man, like, what?
And if there's that picture of an open Thielen, but on that
the broadcast got like that. That's like a guillotine level screenshot. Like, oh, okay, that's the game.
Yep. Just as soon as that play, I was like, oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna go crack another beer because we're losing tonight.
You're right. And Thielen, of course, is like angry as hell the whole game. He's like waving his arms. This is how angry Thielen and Diggs were throughout the game and frustrated. When you look at the all-22, they're like waving their arms when they're triple covered. Like they're just like, just throw it to me, I'll figure it out. Like they're not open. They're just like demanding the ball.
Cousins like, I don't want to throw an interception this badly.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna get home and my car is gonna be my van is gonna be keyed.
Apparently the ESPN mics, and I almost checked out of the game, so I missed this. But apparently the ESPN mics had picked up. So after Thielen's huge catch and run on a screen pass late in the fourth quarter, that I think helped set up a touchdown. He apparently said that's been open. He didn't just
apparently. He did say it's been here all day with an F word in there.
Yeah. So he was upset. Diggs was upset. He said something in the locker room. I retweeted it. I already forgot what it was.
Same stuff, different week, I believe. But
stuff being not quite the word. It is. It's clear that they were frustrated, and that makes sense. And so you can't necessarily like impute a meaning onto it, right? Because I think people will interpret however they want to interpret, right? Like if people, have a thing about how it's all Cousins' fault, they'll say, well, obviously that they were frustrated with Cousins. It's been there all day. Why didn't Cousins throw it to him? Or if they're frustrated with the offensive coordinator, if it's been there all day, why didn't they call it, right? You can kind of interpret your own kind of meaning onto it. So we don't actually know, or maybe it's just like they were having a bad game, right? Because like they were losing, and just frustration kind of appears when that happens. It's not like they're like Mike Wallace, right? Where they get upset after a win because they didn't get the ball. Like it's different, right? So, that's all kind of open to interpretation. But I mean, you take a look at the hashtag film, and they would like, we talk, and I've mentioned this before, but we talk a lot about how double teams in the NFL are fairly rare, especially in terms of receivers. And how very often when we talk about a double team, we're talking about like bracketing. Like when Calvin Johnson is double teamed, what's happening is that you've got a safety on top and a cornerback on the bottom. And when Johnson releases, there's two defenders, who have the ability to break on the ball, but they're not like double teaming. But like Diggs and Thielen were both like double teamed. Like it was nuts seeing like two cornerbacks attempt to follow in phase, in man coverage or whatever, which is crazy. And so you end up with some plays where Aldrick Robinson is like on some linebacker up the seam. He's just like waving for the ball. And Thielen is bracketed by a safety and a cornerback, and Diggs is double teamed by a cornerback and a linebacker, and there's a safety on top. And he's also demanding the ball. It's just weird. And then like Cousins is like getting sacked, right? Like it's disasters everywhere.
It was a bit of a mess to be sure. Well, where do you want to start? Because they tried running the ball, and that didn't seem to work very well.
I was told that would work. I was told you just needed to run the ball enough times.
Well, I saw a graphic that explained that, if you ran the ball X number of times, the Vikings were going to win. They had a non-zero chance of losing. Right,
yeah. You run the ball 20 or fewer times, you'll lose. Like you're 0-16-1. Or something, but if you run the ball 21 plus times, you're like 45-8. So like, that's obviously causal. That definitely,
that's not a made up stat at all.
Right? Yeah, well, it's definitely like, running causes wins. It's not like wins cause running. It's not like people run the ball a lot when they're ahead or anything like that. So you definitely just need to run the ball a lot, and like. To DeFilippo's credit, I guess, they maintained like this perfect play calling balance of like 10 runs, 10 passes. And it just felt forced in a way that like I tweeted during the game, like, I feel like this is not context appropriate play calling. I think they're just calling plays or he's just calling plays to call plays. And I don't know, maybe it's just because the balance was weird to me and I was picking up on that, or I just was imputing my own interpretation, but it just felt really out of sync in a way that even previous underperforming offenses, say like their game against the Bills, it didn't feel out of sync because there was like not a clear character to their play calling, and it just felt a lot different.
This felt a lot like one of those arguments in a relationship where they got upset that you weren't.
I'll run the ball.
Exactly, that you weren't doing something. Like, fine, I made mashed potatoes. Here, I made it. Oh, you don't want to have it? It's not going to work for you? Fine, I made it. You can't complain that I didn't do it.
It's like, these are russet potatoes and you kept all the skins in. I can't.
Not important. I made potatoes. I did what you asked me to do. Get off my back. No, I think we need to break up. You think you're going to have more fun in Green Bay next year.
Right, yeah. So, like, maybe that is more what led to the firing DeFilippo, like, being obviously ticked off that he was asked to run the ball, and so he has this, like, perfect balance that was, like, kind of dumb. So, maybe. I don't know. The play calling felt just so out of sorts to me in that game in a way that it hadn't for the rest of the season. So, maybe that played a role because like you can't. So first of all, DeFilippo is like from New Jersey, was in Philadelphia, was in Cleveland, and that is a surprisingly Minnesota move. Like, wow, that's the most passive aggressive thing I've ever seen. Your protest of the play calling critique was to just do what they said and it not work. Like, that's incredible. Wow. You should stay in Minnesota for years, dude. Like that is like insanely passive aggressive. But maybe I'm just making it all up, and that's just kind of what I thought in my head. But during the game, it did feel kind of out of sorts. So you don't want, I guess, that in an offensive coordinator if that is the case. But yeah, It's just. He ran the ball. It didn't work. It hasn't worked most games. Like maybe they should have run the ball more against the Patriots, but the opportunities were actually relatively limited. So, yeah, I guess. I mean, even like it's weird, like when you defend yourself by like in a presser after like a week after the game, after the Patriots game, and you say, well, actually, when you take out like third downs where you have to do situation play calling, the balance was actually pretty good for the first two quarters. And then after that, the game gets out of hand. You have to catch up. And then you have to call the third downs, like they are. And so you can't worry about run pass balance. So it was actually a pretty balanced game, even if we didn't, maybe run the ball all that much. And so if that's your defense during the Patriots game, then like, why are you like forcing it in the Seattle game? It was weird.
It was really weird. And watching both Latavius Murray and Cook try to find seams when it shouldn't have been called to begin with. That said, there was some decent play action that was resulting from it, and there was a little bit of success. But man, the calling in this game, the play calling in this game was just
it was. And you take a look at some of the other plays that were called. Even if you say like, well, this is appropriate for the situation, and the fact that it's a pass play and it's like third and long or whatever. Or second and long, right? And you take a look at some of those plays, and you've got these receivers running long breaking routes and pressure arriving quickly, and you don't have any receivers that have the ability to break open quickly, and so Cousins has to scramble, or it's pressure, or he dumps it off to a running back that's like 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and so that's like a play design problem that's not taking into account how quickly the Seattle defense is getting to the quarterback. And so that ends up being like poor contextual play calling. And that ends up resulting in like receivers not being open because they're being doubled, and you've got, a tight end back in pass protection. So you've got one fewer eligible receiver, and your running back's not running a real route anyway. So you've only got 3 receivers that are like running actual routes, and your running back just kind of hanging out in the flat. So like that ends up becoming a problem. And it's weird because the Vikings offense is not a particularly deep passing offense, even though we've seen a bunch more aggressive shots from Cousins.
Aggressive shots that are 10, 15 yards past their receiver, but aggressive shots nevertheless.
Right. But you see aggressive shots from Cousins that are not working out, but you see them more often than you did under Bradford, they did under Bridgewater, but you did under Ponder, I guess. But it's still relative to the rest of the league fairly low. Like their average depth of target is like the 3rd lowest in the league. And so it's weird in this game to see aggressive shots while the offense was struggling with pressure.
Who on earth is having shorter distances for their passing than us?
That's actually a pretty interesting question. I just looked this up, so here it is. So it's the 4th lowest. So there's 3 offenses that are lower. This is a delight. This is good company. San Francisco with Nick Mullins, / Jimmy / CJ. Oakland with Derek Carr. And Jacksonville.
With what used to be Bortles.
Yeah, with the corpse of Blake Bortles just haunting Cody Kessler.
It's like, who on earth is, like, I can't even imagine their fan base is like, we'd really like to throw the ball in front of the line of scrimmage sometime. Any time would be good.
There is one good offense that has a really low average depth of target. And once I say it, you'll know why. New Orleans. Because obviously you're throwing the ball to Kamara.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and he'll figure out the rest, so that's fine. But then it's like, so the Saints are just above the Vikings, and they still have like a fifth of a yard above this. So there's like actually a pretty big gap between the Saints and the Vikings, even though the Saints are just above the Vikings. And then it's the Titans and the Lions. So great.
I don't know if great's the right word for that, but we'll use that to move on a little bit. What else can we say about the play of Kirk Cousins?
I mean, he was poor. Like, I think that the idea that, hey, these receivers aren't open or whatever, that's not quite accurate either. Like, it was really impressive the amount of like work that the Seahawks put into making sure that Thielen or Diggs didn't get opportunities. But that made the throws more difficult. That didn't make them impossible. And then he was also, when he identifies the coverage, he wasn't moving on quickly enough from what he was seeing to get to kind of the next read in the possession. I mean, like, so Luke Braun tweeted out a thread of 3rd and shorts, and Nick Olson tweeted out essentially just a series of clips in one tweet that was a series of like instances where the receivers were not necessarily open. And I don't think a lot of those clips, especially of the receivers, were that damning of the offense's ability to crack those receivers open. Some of it was like these play calls were too long, and that's fine. Some of it was, I think, Cousins was not identifying kind of where the ball could go in a way that would open up the receiver. Some of it was that Cousins wasn't, processing quickly enough. Matthew Collar has a thing about how Cousins is always kind of late throwing the ball, and whether or not that's been true for the season, I don't know. But that was definitely true in this game. And then to top it, kind of all of that off, is that he was also inaccurate. The ball placement was really poor. And so the Vikings offense could only get going when they passed really short in the game with a ton of screens, which occurred in the second quarter. So like the first half was, I should say the third quarter, because the first half it was like 4 of 8 or whatever. In the third quarter they ended up having, so the first half they had a 50% completion rate. And the third quarter they ended up having a 70% completion rate, but like still for like 3.3 yards an attempt or something like that. That's because of a ton of short passes. So that's kind of how they ended up responding, but they still didn't. It was a lot of that was because of the poor ball placement and the inaccuracy. So even if a receiver catches the ball, they end up having to adjust, and it ends up, sapping the potential for them to get, 3-4 more yards of after catch yardage, which ruins the point of like a screen or a short pass anyway. So in that case, DeFilippo was kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because the deep shots weren't working, the short shots weren't working. Even after you adjust for the amount of pressure that they're having, they decreased the amount of pressure, and with those short passes, especially in the third quarter, and that's not working. Yeah, man. Like, he adjusted his game.
Passes to tight ends were getting dropped.
Yeah. Well, Conklin drops the first one, catches the second one, which fine, I guess. They didn't end up giving the first down to him, so it ended up being a 3rd and short, which we know how that went. So that kind of sucks. So really, if he had just caught it on the first one, you wouldn't have to worry, because 2nd and short, I'm sure they're fine. So
there's got to be some statistical analysis to be done there.
So 2nd and short is actually the best down and distance on the football field. Like, it's actually weirdly, and I'm not saying teams should do this, but it is, your expected points are higher on 2nd and 1 than they are if you go an additional yard and convert a new set of downs. In fact, you have to go like 6 more yards on after you cross the down marker for it to have higher expected points than 2nd and 1. Like, 2nd and 1 is really good.
Well, I learned something today.
It's weird, yeah.
Well, we already touched on the only special teams play that we should even care to mention. But I guess the only other thing I want to just bring up is the terrible stat that exists and will continue to exist until Kirk Cousins actually wins the Monday night game. But he's now 0-7 in Monday night games, which is apparently a thing.
Yeah, which I guess we could ask him about. He sounds annoyed at getting the primetime games questions. Fair, but also
he plays for the right team. The Vikings usually tend to lose in like afternoon and evening games. It's a thing. Everyone was like, "Oh, the curse is lifted after they beat the Packers," but it was just like, "Oh, the Packers are bad." It's only going to feel worse. Yeah, it's only going to get worse from here.
Yeah, so it's like the Patriots and the Seahawks right after that. Great, cool.
So the Vikings land in Minneapolis at 4 a.m. and John DeFilippo is fired at 11. What?
So they didn't fire him on the tarmac.
No,
so that's
this was not a tarmac thing. They maybe it is like a relationship, and that Zimmer's like, I'm gonna sleep on this. So I'm still upset about this in the morning. We'll talk. And like, yep, I'm still upset. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna sit and talk to you, and you're gonna be let go, and we're gonna promote Stefanski, which a lot of people thought should have got the job to begin with.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about what he'll be able to bring. Because when we went from Turner to Shermer, the Vikings started passing a lot shorter. With Turner, they were not passing particularly deep or aggressive, but with Shermer, they were passing like a yard below the average depth of target, like that of like 31st place in average depth of target. Like it was extreme, and it was working. The offense got a lot better. It was like 28th, and it moved up to like 18th. Like obviously that occurred at the same time the Vikings stopped recovering fumbles, so they lost a bunch of games, but the offense was better. And that was obviously in response to like how poor that offensive line was, how good the after catch receivers were, and so on and so forth, as well as the fact that Sam Bradford is like very accurate, especially in short areas. So that all like makes sense as an adjustment to the poor offensive line. But the Vikings are already doing that. They're passing very short as a result of a poor offensive line, as a result of receivers that do a very good job after the catch and can make the most of screens. But like Diggs just was not that successful at it early in the year. The Vikings were not successful at it in the game. Again, they've got like the fourth lowest average depth of target already in the league. You could get rid of the ball quicker. I mean, the amount of time in the pocket above 2.6 seconds is still a little too high given the quality of that offensive line. But it is kind of weird. And some of that has to do with the fact that, you've got play action passes, and play action passes are like a good thing. There should be more of them, but they do take longer. So that's going to adjust your time in the pocket, statistic in a way that it's going to kind of throw off the average and throw off the measurement in terms of like what it can do for you. So yeah, maybe he incorporates a lot more play action. I would like to see that. But a lot of the broad play calling strokes, it's very difficult to tell, what he'll be able to do. That said, that's why he has the job and not me. Like, I'm like, what do you do? And he probably already has a plan. He's probably had a plan for 3 weeks.
Like, especially after the Patriots game, it's like, okay, yeah, I might need to do some sort of work here. What would I do if I were an offensive coordinator?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. I saw a bunch of people on the timeline tell me that the zone running scheme, like, sucks, which I just find that, like, really odd. Because, like, that is what Dalvin Cook is best at. He was drafted as a zone runner. They switched to increase their zone running usage when they drafted him. Zimmer was very open about that. It's like one of the things that he was actually like willing to just put on the record. And it worked for him last year. Like it was something that he was able to get a bunch of yards doing, admittedly for like 4 games. The Seahawks switched to more base running, and that helped them, but they had the players to do it. They have like a bunch of 330-pound offensive linemen that can win their base blocks. I don't know that like the Vikings were good enough to win their base blocks. I don't know that there's a reason to switch from zone running. I thought that was like the most unusual criticism I've seen. Like, A, zone running obviously doesn't suck. I mean, every team uses it. B, a lot of the most successful teams use it a lot, running the ball. So like that's weird. But like C, like what about the offensive linemen make you think that they're better base blockers? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and those that believe that all of the woes of this offense are going to completely go away now that John DeFilippo is no longer, in charge of the play calling, I feel like they're in for a rude awakening. This isn't the sort of thing that is fixed overnight. This is still his basic scheme. It's just going to be run by a different person. And maybe a slightly different look here or there, but this isn't, as you always see, with an offensive coordinator that is fired mid-season or is let go partway through the season. Like, this is this isn't going to be a quick fix. Everybody's pointing to the whole, I believe, 2012 Ravens and how they were able to be successful. That is a ridiculous outlier. That is a huge outlier in the way things end up working.
So it is, and what's really weird is that the offense got worse for the first 3 games, right, which were the final 3 games of the season. It didn't get better until actually the playoffs started. So you take a look, they were like 18th they weren't even 18th. I've got the spreadsheet up because I was like really fascinated because like Jim Caldwell is a very unlikely hero, right? Like, yes, hero Jim Caldwell. So the Ravens under Cam Cameron in terms of points per drive ranked, where are we? 12th. So they were actually doing a pretty good job. They put up like 44 points in one of the games. They put up like they had a couple of 30-plus point games. They just also had a couple of like 10-point games. And then under Caldwell, they actually got a little bit worse. They dropped down to like 16th in points per drive. So there's not actually that much change. But then the playoffs started, and in the playoffs, they put up like 2.5 points per drive, which would be the 3rd over the course of that entire season. So that was like a weird spark. So this is the piece I'm writing right now is about what a new offensive coordinator might be able to do. And there's a lot of times when an offensive coordinator has positively impacted things after changing midway through the season. So you've got Freddie Kitchens, who's maybe the weirdest name but best example, where Cleveland ends up going like 27th in points per drive, like really extremely bad, to 4th in points per drive, which that's such an insane outlier. Obviously, you can't use that as a guide. The Vikings under Norv Turner is probably a better example because you've got a lot of similar type players, but you go from 28th in points per drive, so very similar to where Cleveland was. And then under Shermer, they jump all the way up to 18th, which is a good improvement from 28th, right? So that is kind of the really high end, right? And you can get Jim Bob Cooter with the Lions in like 2015, but most of the time it doesn't do anything. Right? Because you're firing guys because people are underperforming, and sometimes that has to do with talent. The Dolphins did it, the Raiders did it. So the Dolphins did it under Joe Philbin. They changed their offensive coordinator after 2 weeks after they changed their coach. So they promoted their tight ends coach to the head coach after they got rid of Joe Philbin, and then just a little bit later they changed their offensive coordinator. I think Zach Taylor, and the offense got worse. It's one of the worst offenses relative to talent that probably we've seen over the past 6 years. Same thing happened with Oakland a couple of years ago. Generally, it doesn't do anything, but there are individual circumstances, and the Cam Cameron one is actually not one of them until the playoffs start, I guess, where the offense gets better after you switch coordinators midway through the season. And it makes sense, right? Like, you don't have time to install a new offense. You have to go with the offense that's installed and just play call better, I guess. And if the tools you have available are not great, then the calling that you'll do is not going to be that great. One thing you could do to reduce the amount of misdirection is to winnow down the playbook really significantly and only call a certain number of plays, which might be able to let you cut down a lot of the miscommunication. But also, Bobby Wagner said last night that they knew every single play the Vikings were doing. So do you want to make the playbook more predictable? Like, it's just such a weird problem. And it's much more likely than not to do anything. Is just, there are circumstances, including this year, where it's done something. And I would say Byron Leftwich has done a much better job than Mike McCoy, for example, in Arizona, to add on to the 2018 examples. But it is it's a moonshot. And I think the Vikings kind of recognize that too. Given what Zimmer said today in his conference.
Yeah, and Zimmer had said before, he didn't feel like he wanted to waste this year. Like if there was going to be a shot, this was going to be it. So, boy, that it's rough, and you don't want you hate to see somebody lose a job or whatever. But this hasn't been very good, and it's been time. And apparently, some people believe it's been time for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's like an unjust outcome. Like, I disagree. I think that they should have held on to him. But and I'll definitely be wrong, right? If like Stefanski does turn the offense around in a short period of time, but it's not an unjust outcome. It makes sense. The offense wasn't producing. There's one guy accountable for that. That's the offensive coordinator, and so they got rid of him. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are happy, and it's kind of at odds with kind of the emotional stakes because Zimmer was very like upset about feeling like he was forced to do it. Obviously, DeFilippo was very upset. So, yeah, I mean, it just kind of sucks all around that it got to that point, but it's not unfair. It just sucks,
Yeah, that's about right. Well, let's jump into the mailbag. We have a lot of good stuff in here, and the first question is from Ryan, who asks, what black magic did Seattle pull to improve the O-line without changing anyone? If it was sacrificing a kicker, is this something the Vikings should look into in the offseason?
Well, so the last kicker they let go of is hitting game winners in Oakland. So really you're talking about murder, and I cannot condone that officially. So
even if they kill your dog, which is a callback to last year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right, that's right. But Jesus. But,
I can remember that, but not where I put my car keys this morning.
They changed their offensive line coach. They quote unquote cut the cable. They got rid of Tom Cable and they added Mike Solari. And for that minor change, like it has made all the world. It's like some corny parable or whatever. But yeah, they changed their offensive line coach. An offensive line coach is very rare, very difficult to find. The Vikings don't have one, right? Because Tony Sparano passed away, and so they have to go with co-offensive line coaches Clancy Barone and the assistant coach, whose name I feel actually bad about this. His name escapes me at the moment. But it's a co-offensive line coach situation. Todd Downing was moved from offensive assistant to, which is like a general position, to tight ends coach to replace Barone. And it's not as if you've got, Dante Scarnecchia or Mike Tice there. You've got, guys that are trying to figure out kind of what Sparano left behind. And obviously the Sparano unit last year, had higher highs. It was like better coached in some respects because, you had players like Joe Berger performing at the level that they were, and Pat Elflein playing better than he was this year, although that might be injury related. Mike Remmers playing at tackle much better than he's playing at guard, which, who knows, right? Because I think he's just ill suited to guard, but it felt like there was more cohesion. So, that plays a really big role in it, and it might be kind of a determining factor for the Vikings going forward because they're going to have to look for an offensive line coach.
Well, next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, a few people, example Kevin Seifert, are reporting that Zimmer is hard to work under, which partially explains why he's had 3, now 4 offensive coordinators in 4 years. Any thoughts on whether that seems accurate?
I mean, Pat Shurmur left because he was a good, right? Like, he got promoted. And I don't think that we have very good evidence of that because, like, who else has left? I can't think of anybody.
Well, I mean, Norv left voluntarily.
Right. I mean, outside of offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And obviously Stefanski was blocked. He would have left. But, like, these people haven't left, right? And so I don't know that that's the case. I mean, Norv Turner resigned / was pushed out. Zimmer will swear to his dying day that he didn't push Turner out, and so Norv resigned. But I thought he was essentially fired. That's, I guess, just my opinion at this point because we don't have anything confirming that. I mean, like, is he hard to work under, or was Norv Turner a bad coordinator from Minnesota? I think it's that one. Shurmur gets promoted. He stays there. He does really well. He ends up getting a head coaching job. You end up adding DeFilippo, who performs poorly, and he's like fired, and so now you have your 4th one. And so the turnover is really the 2, right? Because I'm not going to count Shurmur, and obviously, saying 4 makes it feel 4 is bigger than 3, right? But like the 4th one, Kevin Stefanski, it's not like he's already left. So you had 2 instances of offensive coordinator turnover that are the result of underperforming / not wanting to be there, I guess. But like, a lot of people were already calling for DeFilippo. And so it's not surprising. A lot of people at the time were calling for Turner, so that's not surprising. Is he hard to work with? Does he make the offense worse because he's hard to work with? That, I think, would be a stretch. So I don't know. Seifert's larger point that Zimmer's ultimately the one to be held accountable is a good one, but I don't know if it's like that he's hard to work with necessarily, because like no one else is left, and you only heard about one person being blocked, and that's Stefanski.
I was trying to remember if Bill Musgrave was under Zimmer or if he was under.
He's under Frazier.
He was under Frazier. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I was sitting there like, yeah, that's that was the only one I was like kind of waffling on. Yeah, okay, yeah, that was not Zimmer. That was somebody else. Okay, figured I would just double check that. Next question is from Joe, who asks, "Does Hill look like he could be a starting corner?"
Yeah. I don't think he'd be a particularly great starting corner this year, but I think that the stuff that he's shown is all really positive, and I think kind of moving forward, he's playing at a level that makes me think he could be a high-quality starting corner in the near future. He's had 2 very bad games, 2 very good games, and 1 game, this one, where he was up and down and ended up being pretty positive. So I think so, and I think that he is performing better than a lot of cornerbacks that are starting in Week 15 are, and so that's kind of a good sign. And I think he can get a high-quality starter soon.
Next question. Devin asks, why is Mike Remmers still playing guard? I have to believe Brett Jones is the better option at this point.
Maybe. I think offensive line changes are really difficult to do when you don't have an offensive line coach. It's a difficult conversation between, 2 co-coaches. Ian Remmers is being paid a lot, which, that's, you're going to pay him either way. That's like lost money. So I don't think that should figure into it, but it very often does. I don't know. He's not a good guard, but like, it's not as if, we know that Brett Jones is a good guard, especially because, so this is interesting. In training camp, he was a much better run blocker than pass protector. In the preseason, he was a much better pass protector than run blocker. With the Giants, he was a much, much better pass protector than run blocker. And Zimmer wants to run the ball. So he's not a particularly good run blocker based off of the in-game evidence that we have. That might play a role. Not that Mike Remmers is like a phenom at it. Maybe they think of Brett Jones as center only. He's been center his entire life, from high school to college at Regina. Just always got to say that. And with the New York Giants, so maybe they think he's center only. I don't know. It could be the money they pay. It could be the run blocking. It could be that they think he's center only. It could be all of those things. Isidore is not good, though, so like I can see why he's not playing.
Next question is from Buddy, who asks, how much of this loss is Zimmer's fault as opposed to, or as like head coach, as opposed to Flip's as offensive coordinator?
Right, so if you like extract like all of the residual blame that a head coach gets for his offensive coordinator playing poorly because he's the head coach and you hired that guy, I don't know, like a fair, like, so the defense obviously plays extremely well and Zimmer is very responsible for that, and so it's always going to be kind of difficult to kind of nail down all of that. It really depends on how much DeFilippo altered his play calling to adjust for Zimmer's input, whether or not it was input from the media or input in the coach's room. Like if Zimmer's sending messages only through like the podium where he talks about wanting to run the ball more, and he's not getting that much one-on-one communication with what that means or in what situations, then I think Zimmer bears a greater portion of the responsibility than one might initially think from a hands-off coach. But if Zimmer just kind of let DeFilippo, or if Zimmer like had conversations with DeFilippo and let DeFilippo kind of design everything from the game plan and told him like not to worry about the public comments about running the ball or whatever, then I guess not that much. And again, we're isolating the responsibility that DeFilippo has, and therefore the responsibility that Zimmer has for hiring DeFilippo, et cetera, that he has as a head coach from Zimmer. So that's a difficult one to do. But given that he's the head coach a lot, given that we're excluding that amount, probably not a ton unless his like public comments influenced DeFilippo's play calling a lot, which it felt like it did, but I can't know that.
Yeah. Next question. Do you see us drafting offensive line in the first round regardless of talent on the board?
Never regardless. I mean, the Vikings have had a lot of blinding needs over the years, and the only one that they've kind of chased is quarterback, which is very common across the league. But they've been very into just grabbing talent at positions that aren't necessarily needs at the time. The Vikings did not need a defensive tackle when they drafted Trey Floyd. They did not need a corner when they drafted Mike Hughes. They've done this kind of consistently. They didn't really need a nickel corner when they drafted Mackenzie Alexander. They could have kept Captain Munderland at the time. So I don't think they will, especially because of how underinvested they are, generally speaking, at guard, and that's where the need is more than anything else. So I don't think they'll do it regardless of talent. I think it'll really depend on the talent available left at the board. If there's no talent there and they don't draft an offensive lineman, obviously people are going to be angry, but that would be the right decision, even though I'm a very draft your needs before you draft best player available kind of guy.
Also asked, why are you a Vikings fan?
Man, I don't know, man. Accident of birth.
This was a game that made you question a few things. I was watching it with a room full of kids and trying not to swear, which made me question all of my life choices up to that point.
That sounds like one of the most frustrating things in the world.
Not being able to. There were a couple of cups that were thrown into the sink with quite a bit of enthusiasm. That happened a couple of times. Oh God, yeah, it was rough. A lot of mistakes were made. How about that?
Right? Yeah.
Mistakes were made. Jordan asks, if the final wild card spot came down to a fist fight between starting quarterbacks, who would win, Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson?
Russell Wilson. So Cousins has reach and height, but I don't think he even has weight. I mean, Russ is built.
Russ is stacked. Russ has got that whole baseball player thing going on.
Russ takes blows better than any other quarterback in the league. Well, besides like Cam. Like Cam got into a car accident and it didn't matter.
I like how this almost evolved into another situation of, well, Cam Newton doesn't get any respect at all ever. We're also going to snub him on this too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's other quarterbacks that take body blows better, but there's not many.
Yeah.
I don't know that Cousins is.
I feel like it would be an apology fight.
What's an apology fight?
Well, like smack you and like, oh, are you okay?
Are you good? I think that so they're forced to fight each other or whatever for the wild card spot.
Not the craziest thing the NFL has done in the last 20 years.
Right.
To be fair,
they would definitely check in on each other for sure, throughout the fight.
Would the NFL be able to find the footage of the fight?
No. Are you kidding me? they would film it and they wouldn't find it.
They'd have it in HD. Somehow TMZ would have it before the NFL office.
Right, yeah.
Intercepting the broadcast or something. Just ridiculous. Dylan asks, how many coaches do we get rid of between now and throughout the offseason? Over under 3.5?
Under. I don't think they'll get rid of many coaches. Obviously, there's no reason to get rid of any of the defensive coaches. I don't think they'll be poached either. Offensively, well, no one's getting poached from that offense. I think Stefanski's going to remain the interim offensive coordinator. I think they're going to keep Todd Downing at tight ends or whatever. Maybe we move Clancy Barone back to tight ends and move Todd Downing to offensive line. I don't know. Move Todd Downing to quarterbacks coach, obviously, and then hire an offensive line coach. So they'll add one without firing anyone, probably. So I think it's the under. Maybe Mike Prefer, but that's still under 3.5.
Yeah, I think Prefer. I think it's probably time for Prefer to go. Although you're not going to gain much by losing Prefer, mid-season.
Right.
Errol and Patty ask, how could the Vikings offense seem so flat, unprepared, and uncreative in such a big game? How come no running back screens until late in the game?
Well, I mean, they did try shorter running back passes that just weren't working. They did try the wide receiver screens that weren't working. No running back screens just in particular. Yeah, I guess maybe they saw something that it wasn't like the Seahawks missed very few tackles, and Bobby Wagner hasn't missed a tackle in like a full calendar year. It's like insane. So I could very well see them like seeing something on film that would move them away from running back screens. As for like why the offense looked unprepared, man, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I just know that they were out of sorts and played poorly. I have no idea why. I doubt it's the primetime stuff. That's so small sample and kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, like, it keeps happening and it's just very difficult to like ignore. But yeah, I don't know. It just sucks.
Next question is from Thomas Anderson Jr., who says, so does this just cement John DeFilippo becoming the Packers head coach next season out of spite? I will say this, and I have to like put a caveat on this. If John DeFilippo is hired as a head coach next year for next season, I will have a full meal over at Ruby Tuesdays. Like
Ruby Tuesdays. Don't spend yourself poor, James.
I hate Ruby Tuesdays. I think it's the worst thing on the planet. Well, okay, it's not the worst thing on the planet. You know, there's obvious, racism, gun violence, whatever. But it's still like ranked.
Well, okay, so the good thing about Ruby Tuesdays are they've got these like pumpernickel rye croutons. I haven't seen that in a lot of places in their salad bars.
Yep, you are a firm believer in their salad bar, and I happen to think that everything involved with that building is trash. So like, I'm willing to.
I'm not going to stand like it's an above average salad bar. Like it's not like.
Let me walk that back for a moment. I dislike Ruby Tuesdays so much that I'm willing to walk that back or I'm willing to eat there and report on my on hate eating the food. But like,
I guarantee DeFilippo at least gets a quarterback coaching job. There's no question about that.
Yep, absolutely. Fine. I'm saying that he is not he's not hired as a head coach this year. If he is, I will bite the bullet and do something I absolutely hate. But I'm willing to put that on the line. I do not think that he becomes a head coach next year, even in Green Bay.
I'll say this. Green Bay is the only possibility, if only because owners like to treat teams as like playthings or as part of like status objects or whatever. And it is like not very fun or exciting or punchy to hire a fired coordinator as your head coach. So I think given that the ownership in Green Bay is a distributed situation, I'll say that.
It's a fake distributed situation, but it's a distributed situation nevertheless.
But there's no head owner that like goes to rich people party and is like, yeah, I just hired Andy Reid or whatever, right? Like, so like I think the fact that like he's coming off of a year where he was fired would make it difficult for him to be a head coach. So I would say he's probably not going to get head coaching opportunities outside of Green Bay. I also don't think he's going to get the Green Bay job. I do think he'll probably get an offensive coordinator job, and if not, I think he's guaranteed a quarterback's coach job.
Yeah, maybe he'll end up being the offensive coordinator in Carolina after they shoot Norv Turner into the sun if Carolina continues to lose out the rest of the year.
Yeah.
I just like the visual of Norv Turner being shot out of a cannon into the sun. Dennis Nardi asks, you have a time machine and you go forward 1 year to the end of the 2019 season. The Vikings end up with another mediocre record of 9-7 and sneak into the playoffs into the last wildcard spot, but of course do nothing in the playoffs, like they're primed to do this year. How do the Vikings start planning for the post 3-year Cousins contract era? Do you think they'll try to retain or draft a quarterback in 2020? They'll wait until 2021? What are you thinking? Or is Slaughter the answer?
Sorry, Don. Slaughter's not the answer. He could be a very interesting backup. That'd be cool. Come 2020, if Cousins is the reason for the underperformance in 2019, or if the quarterback play is the reason or whatever, right? I think they draft someone in 2020 Obviously, unless like the draft just doesn't look good for whatever the 2020 quarterbacks are or whatever. But the plan would be if Cousins underperforms in 2019 to draft someone in 2020 and have him learn under Cousins, whatever that's worth. Assuming like he sucks in 2018 and 2019, who knows what that's worth for the 2020 mentorship program. But yeah, I think that, the head coaches are very much attached to bridge years, even when they don't necessarily make a ton of sense. Look at Hugh Jackson, right? The Vikings did that with Bridgewater, where he was like sitting under Matt Castle, extraordinaire, right? I think that they would draft someone in 2020 in a scenario where the reason that they're like eking themselves into and then out of the playoffs is quarterback play.
Next question is going to be from DJ, who says, the Vikings, Lions, and Packers are all in the same spot. How do they play around a bloated quarterback contract? It seems like the NFL seems like the NFL teams in general seem to be victims of a exploded salary cap.
Yeah, so this might be the last time I compliment Justice Mosqueda. He has a very good article over at Optimum Scouting about the fact that there's no middle class for quarterbacks. And so the very top quarterback salaries and like the median top 20 quarterback salary, which is something I wrote about a couple of years ago when I was talking about like last year, when Case Keenum played himself out of a contract, I said that there's no middle class because in 2000, the average of the average of the top 5 quarterback salaries versus the average of the next 15 quarterback salaries was so stark that the top 5 quarterbacks doubled the salaries of the next 15 in quarterback salary ranking. That has fallen down a virtually straight line over the course of the past 18 years, where now that number is like 20%. Some of that has to do, in fairness, with the rapid expansion of the cap, and that every new quarterback deal, just because it's taking up the same percentage of the cap as before, necessarily is the highest paid deal in the history of the NFL. And we're going to see that next year. There's a report released that the cap will go up by another $10 million, which is like the 4th consecutive year it's done that. So that's part of it. But another part of it is that you're paying like your Mike Glennon's $15 million a year. And so you have to carve out space for a middle class so that you can have quarterbacks get paid kind of commensurate to their value, even though quarterbacks are just so much more important to winning than other positions. Otherwise, you're just going to get screwed by quarterbacks on rookie deals and Tom Brady every year, which is, like Patrick Mahomes, right? Like Patrick Mahomes, Jared Goff, Tom Brady, and then the 2 outliers, I guess, are Phillip Rivers, who I don't think is even on a new deal, or not even on a very expensive deal, and then Drew Brees, who is on a famously expensive deal. So like that's kind of where you are. But Drew Brees, at least for being so expensive, is an elite level quarterback who's having an MVP quality season, and that's what you need from a quarterback getting paid that much. So yeah, you do need to have an expanded middle class, because otherwise teams who get a quarterback now suddenly can't compete because they have a quarterback.
It is kind of an odd thing that you're kind of trapped by the success of the NFL, or at least trapped by the success of the expansion of the salary cap.
Yeah, just because agents are only accepting like percentages of the cap that match previous percentages of the cap, and that means just tons of money. And because the previous percentages of the cap were kind of broken, now it feels kind of more broken, and now there's more guaranteed money because quarterbacks are raising in value, and it just gets rough.
I was going to say, at some point, like, this expands into, like, contraction, right? Like, this can't continue to, like, spiral out in this way. I feel like there's be some, like, argument involving this, or, like, involved in the CBA with this.
Yeah, well, so the issue is that the owners wouldn't want, like, a separate salary cap for quarterbacks or something, which would be kind of cool, because you end up paying all the players just a little bit more, and owners want to hold on to their money. But if you just kept quarterbacks kind of separate from the salary cap, that would be fascinating, and might resolve this problem, so long as you still had a cap floor. But you would have to have, it's weird because these situations don't come up a ton. You have to have a situation where a team is willing to walk away from the quarterback, just like Washington was with Cousins, and then other teams aren't auctioning themselves into bankruptcy trying to grab them. Otherwise, teams will hold on to their Andy Daltons and their Matt Staffords. I mean, they're not in the same class. It's unfair to Stafford, but still. They'll hold on to their Andy Daltons because like the threat of mediocrity is so scary, right? And if you draft a guy to replace Andy Dalton, like there's like a 50% shot that your first round guy is just not going to be as good as the guy you let go. And the guy you let go was friggin' Andy Dalton. So it's tough. Quarterbacks have a ton of leverage, and it's going to be weird if we ever come to a head where the quarterback leverage dips off. But I think that's the only direction we can go in.
Side note, where do you think Joe Flacco plays next year?
Jacksonville. That just sounds right to me. Unless Eli goes because of Coughlin, which that's possible too, I guess.
Well, people have been saying that Eli's going to Jacksonville for at least the last 2 years.
Yeah, so if it's not Eli, then Joe.
Tampa Bay, maybe?
I could see that. It's interesting if they move on from like Jameis Winston so soon, but not that soon, you know? Winston is a really weird case because so if you look at all the positive markers for quarterback play that indicate sustainability going into the future, he has those. And then if you also look at the statistical indicators of negative sustainability for quarterback play, he has those too. Like, so he's like really high in like first down rate. Like he's one of the league leaders in first down rate per throw. It's insane. Or per dropback even. He's also among the league leaders in like interception rate. So cool.
I wonder if he's a league leader in like times he's yelled at us offensive linemen on the sidelines and gotten into fights with them.
I hear that's a good thing. I mean, you got your Jay Cutlers and your Phillip Rivers.
Super Bowl winners, all of them. Next question is from Damian Barrett. We got 2 more questions here. Damian Barrett, who says, in an attempt to ignore what I've just watched, meaning the game, my question is, has James thought of embracing his inability to pronounce payment methods by going all in on alternative versions of the other one? May I suggest PayPal, which sounds a bit like Australian?
Oh, yeah.
I get that. I could, you know...
I don't think you could.
I feel like that would involve a lot more dedication to something that I'm really no. It's a good thought, but
you can Venmo us a James Bagachnik.
We determined in New York I don't believe in anything like new. So Venmo,
that's right.
Venmo.
Yeah,
is,
so no Venmo, no Cash App.
I barely get by PayPal as it is. Kyle Slaby asks, James, tell me what black magic you performed on my fantasy team. Even with a made extra point, I would have lost by 20, and Thielen and Gurley wouldn't have made up the difference. I feel like we should explain. Slaby's upset because, first things first, I had the Titans running back on Thursday
Derrick
night.
Henry? You didn't even remember his name.
No, I didn't. For a moment, I forgot his name. I grabbed Derrick Henry like 2 weeks ago, threw him on Thursday. So that's, 50 points. And then
so that's, 50.
Yeah. So that's 50. And then within minutes of Sunday like the early games, his extra point he had an extra point miss. I think it was the kicker for the Patriots. So immediately he was down like 75.
Wow.
And then I had Greg Kittle too. So like,
oh wow, you didn't even get Kittle's name right either. This is incredible.
Yeah,
this is like peak fantasy.
I'm not winning.
This is like your coworker who doesn't follow basketball March Madness bracket stuff.
Yeah, Greg Kittle was. I picked up Kittle right after the Vikings got lit up by him. I was like, I should grab him, and it turned out to be a decent idea.
I mean, I benched him, but I'm not that upset because I played Gronk instead, and so Kittle outscored him by like a substantial amount, but Gronk still scored like 20 points. Like obviously, I should have played him A over Gronk, but B in my flex over like Mark Ingram or whoever got 11 points.
But in any case, the Norse Code, the League One, I'm still in the running to win it for both Arif and I, because a win by one of us is a win for all of us.
Yeah, it's a win for all of us. I got trounced.
Yeah, you got trounced in number 2.
In League 2, yeah. League 1, I'm in the consolation bracket. But in League 2, I just got demolished. It wasn't close. I think I missed one extra point. So
yeah, you missed an extra point as well. It was just like, this is the season for the missed extra points. So I'm hoping to ride a Dusty-style wave of missed extra points to the championship. I got one down. I got 2 more to go, and I can do this.
We believe in you, James.
I'm going to need some help, God of missed extra points. All right, Arif, what do you got to plug?
I'm going to have a piece up on what we can expect from Kevin Stefanski / Kitchens. Hopefully you can get that up at The Athletic soon. My last piece was about how the Vikings have a game flow problem and how that's going to be a problem against Seattle. I was right about something, I guess. So you can find that at The Athletic. Otherwise, that's it.
Well, that is going to be it. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we'll see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.